start. What are we going to be talking about?
Go ahead, Shane.
I just wanted to get back to the idea of just being a critical thinker. Honestly, that's going to be our jumping in point. Like,
okay.
Yeah. We ready?
Yeah,
ready.
Go for it.
All right. Well, am I steering this thing?
Yeah, you're steering this thing. I steered it yesterday, and then I had an issue with the invitation, so I feel like I need to give it to you. So you go for it.
All right. All right. Well, hey, I'm Shane Lawrence. I'm the host of the Ed Podcast, and I am joined by Derek Rodenizer from Beyond Staff Room.
Hello, exciting to be here. Looking forward to the chat, Shane.
And I'm super jacked to be meeting for the first time and chatting with Tom Whitby.
Hi, Shane. How are you?
I am, I'm great. I'm feeling really good that we finally managed to connect. So this is pretty cool. A little nervous to be in front of a camera. It's not my usual gig, but I can blame Derek for that. So it's all good.
We all get used to it.
Or not.
For sure.
Either way.
That's all right. I'm sure everyone wants to see our beautiful faces. So it's all good. So, I mean, Tom, we're kind of doing a little, I guess we wound up doing a 3-parter here on Twitter. I got to step back for a second because I first heard you and heard about you through Derek's Beyond the Staff Room, and I kind of really enjoyed listening to your conversation. One of the things that I enjoyed most is that you seem like the kind of guy who is willing to call BS when you see it. Am I off base on that one, or is this kind of is this the way you like to roll?
No, you're not off base at all. I think everybody should do that.
Well, so I mean, we're gonna eventually seg into Twitter here, but let's just dig into that a little deeper. I mean, what's sort of what's the seed of that? I mean, most people, most teachers, they want to go in and the idea is let's be positive and let's be supportive. And not saying you're not, obviously, because I think you're doing the good work, but what drives you to be that person who's maybe kicking up the dirt a little bit?
I think teachers, by and large, are very supportive people, but unfortunately, we may be supporting things that we never go back and try and figure out where they came from or why we started them. But how can I explain this? I remember listening to a speaker at one time at one of these training sessions that we had. It was like the first day of school, and they brought in the keynote speaker. Mm-hmm. And that's about as much professional training as anybody got in a given year. But I remember him telling a story that she said that she was gathered at a family dinner, and they were going to make a ham. So she was there with her mother, and she sliced the ends of the ham and put it into the tray and then put it in the oven. And she asked her mother, why is it that we slice the ends of the ham off? I never understood that. So the mother said, I don't really know. That's what my mother taught me, but she's still alive, so let's give her a call. Uh-huh. So they called up the great-grandmother, and they said, why is it we slice the ends off of the ham whenever we cook it for these family gatherings? And she said, well, when you girls were young, we had a neighbor who had a pan that we would borrow to cook the ham in, but the pan was always too small, so we'd have to cut off the ends of the ham to fit it in the pan.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think there are many policies that we have in education, things that we do in education, that we don't go back to see where they came from. It's possible that they no longer support what we think that they're supporting. Homework is a perfect example of that. We give homework as an essential part of thinking. It's an essential part of learning when the research tells us it's not. Yet we do it, and teachers support it, and they keep pushing it, and parents expect it, and often teachers are judged by how much homework they give their kids. You're a really good teacher if you give a lot of homework. Well, yeah, that's not really true. But we have to go back and analyze and think about it. We can't take everything on face value. Just because we did it in the past doesn't mean we have to do it now. And the thing is, being in a computer-driven society, change happens much faster than it's ever happened in history. So unless we keep up with that change, we become irrelevant. So we have to analyze what we're doing and see how it fits in the world that we live in today.
Well, it's funny because it almost sounds like there's a real kind of paradox here. Because on the one hand, like you say, you finished off saying that things change so fast. I mean, Twitter being a prime example in terms of the amount of information and the new ideas that are always out there, and it's nonstop. And yet at the same time, education as an institution does seem to be dragging its feet in a lot of areas, right? There's a lot of outmoded things. I mean, you just got to look at a classroom. I mean, I'll look at my classroom, sad to say, right? My classroom looks the same as any other classroom did 120 years ago.
Yet if you look at an operating room, in any hospital, you can't compare it to 100 years ago.
No. So, I mean, the environment isn't changing, and a lot of these practices are still hanging around. So where does that, why is that? I mean, and how do we kind of resolve this, this fast-paced change that seems to be coming with this, this, I don't know, sluggish Goliath that's just kind of going along doing what it's always done?
Well, I've been working on a litmus test. That's something I've been playing with. Is because I found I actually went the other direction, Tom, where it was like I get really excited and I'll do change. I'll just change because I think it's interesting to change, and I get like bored of things easy, and so I'll just change them. So, like you said, we should change it if it's not working, but we shouldn't change it if it is working. And so one thing that I was really conscious of this year was trying to create sort of my litmus test, like what is it that I'm trying to achieve? And homework, I ended up putting a policy at my school that reduced homework pretty drastically. It wasn't doing the desired effect. It wasn't hitting what we were trying to do. So we changed it, right? And other things that used to work 100 years ago still work really well. So we're not changing them, but sort of consciously having whatever that litmus test might be to run all these ideas through has been a good way for me to get rid of things that aren't working, because I can justify that, or keep things that are working so I don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Well, the other thing that slows things down, I mean, the institution of education has always been a very, very conservative institution, and it changes very slowly. One of the reasons for that, I think, is it's perpetuated by people's experiences. If this is the way I learned, this is the way I'm going to teach, and that happens quite a bit. We've got so many teachers today that are what I think of as victims of 20th century education, because that's where they live. They're living in 20th century education. Yet here we are, 17 years into the 21st century. It doesn't fit anymore. The other thing too is public education. One thing that most people have a common experience in is education. So because everyone went to school, everyone thinks they're an expert in what school is, and therefore change will be very difficult for parents as well as teachers.
So if we're going to be critical, then, I mean, I don't mean critical in a negative sense, but if we're really going to be sort of attempting to rethink some of these things that aren't working, I mean, how do we actualize this stuff? I mean, I think what this is all coming down to is that this is all going to take some time, but I feel like it's more than just that. So how do we take these things that aren't right, the things that we notice aren't working, and turn that into positive, actual, tangible change?
It's going to be tough in that when we've got a huge educational system, generally people governing that system throw out mandates that govern everybody. Yet, each school has its own individual needs. There are things that are. Derek just mentioned that he changed his homework policy. Well, that's great. So he doesn't need a mandate to change his homework policy because he's already done it. Yet there are many other schools that aren't even analyzing, what homework is or what homework does. But they tend to want to standardize everything and make everybody the same. And it's just not going to work that way. If anything slows this down, it's that kind of thinking.
Well, here's a thought. I mean, this is really out there maybe, but I mean, should schools then be run more like a corporation, like a individual entity rather than a large system? I mean, I know it's a crazy idea, but I mean, just throwing it
Tom mentioned the rate of change. I think one of the pieces in that rate of change thing that we talk about, that things are moving so fast, is also the differentiation of that change, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what used to be easy to standardize is no longer that easy to standardize because things are changing in each section so quick. Yesterday, Tom and I,
each section. What do you mean?
Like yesterday, Tom and I were talking about PLNs and how you can curate your own PLN, right?
Yeah.
So Professional Learning Network on Twitter, and I'll speak for you, Tom, but he was talking about how in his building, he used to be the only specialist in one area. And now that when he had Twitter, he could actually connect with other specialists, right? That have that same background. It wasn't just him. And so now he's got this network to support and improve his professional standard with other people that are sort of at that same level, for lack of a better word. And so, but that's across the board, like right across the board. Like it often be the case. There's one music teacher in a school, right? Well, now that music teacher can connect with a whole bunch of other music teachers and develop their ability as music teachers together, right? And their needs will be different than the math teacher in the same building. So if I put them both in a professional development session about robots, it just doesn't make any sense, right? Because we're all advancing so quick, and it's so easy to access niches now. It never used to be so easy to access niches. There's probably like 4 or 5 chats on Twitter just about music. Right? Like it's so easy to access niches before. Then that also creates the individuality that's needed to look at. So you can't look at just a whole school, I don't think, because not only are things changing fast, but they're also becoming more developed within the segments. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Tom, I want to throw it over to you in a second here, because I'm just wondering though, like, I mean, how granular do you want to get though? Because I mean, yeah, okay, music teachers get together and they can do their thing. But even amongst those music teachers, the needs aren't going to be the same from site to site to site. So again, I kind of want to come back to this idea, like if we're looking for nimble organizations, I mean, it's just a fact that smaller organizations are more nimble just due to the fact that they're smaller. And you do see some level of this happening with, a lot of schools having specific focuses, like this is an academic school, this is a sports school, this is, where this school has a really, great arts program or whatever, right? But should we be seeking to sort of create sort of specialized sites for each school? Would that be, I don't know, can I throw that over to you, Tom? Is that fair?
When you talk about this stuff, all of this comes down to individuals in that school promoting those programs. Right? I mean, if you've got a school that's really good in art, the reason why it's really good in art, somewhere along the line, it was a regular school, but there was an art teacher who said, hey, listen, this is something that I want to do. And that particular art teacher drove the idea of art within that school, and it evolved and it became much bigger. So now it's become an art school.
Right.
I think technology gives us the ability to individualize our own learning and to collaborate that learning, which makes us stronger in our own areas. So I don't know. It's a question of how granular you want to get is what you asked, but we've got the ability to do it. Why not use it to the best of our ability?
So the space I live in I'm in an independent school.
Is that private meeting?
Yeah, I'm a private school.
Okay. So
we are pretty nimble. And so like Tom said, like that we saw a need to change the homework policy, and we did. I just made the change. I didn't have to ask a superintendent, have to do anything else. I just, consult within the stakeholders of my building and talk to my teachers and get understanding from the parents and my head of school. And then we made the change. So for me, being in that environment, like I love it. I didn't come out of teachers college and expect to go into private schools. It kind of happened. But I appreciate the ability to be flexible. And I've seen that in a wide variety of ways. Like the example I've shared a bunch of times with people is that I was teaching grade 8. I was fresh out of teachers college teaching grade 8. And I had a student ask me how to grow pickles.
That's awesome.
And I was like, well, we have to grow cucumbers and pickle them. Like, we have to do that. And so I went to the store, I bought a pack of seeds. I went to the back, I dug a hole, grew cucumbers. And then next year we pickled
them. Good for you.
Yeah, not bad, eh? But like, I didn't I didn't ask anyone. I didn't get it cleared by anyone. I didn't go through any processes of any kind. I just did it. And then I ended up talking to my principal about it, and I made these gardens, and I made them out of reclaimed cedar logs, and we held them together with railway spikes. And, they were like countersunk, so they were out of way. And another teacher thought it was a great idea and brought it to their school, and were immediately rejected by the board because there were railway spikes in the cedar logs. Now, it's not an actual safety hazard. They're countersunk in the wood. There's no way that anyone could get hurt by this railway spike. But the fact that it was on the list of required materials, it was shut down.
Right? I got a good tip for you for that one.
Okay, go.
I got a good tip. This is actually coming out of the film industry, because if you ever go into a film set, they call clothespins, they call them C-47s. No, seriously, honest to God, you go on a film set, there's clothespins, and they're everywhere. They use them for clipping all sorts of things together, C-47s, because back in the early days of Hollywood, they had to do the same kind of thing. They'd turn in this list of materials they needed to, for this, to make a film. And the accountants are, of course, always looking for ways to save money and whatever else, safety violations. And so they'd look at this line item for, you need, $100 for clothespins. No, scratch it off. Right. So then they started calling them C-47s, and the accountants would see that on the list and be like, oh, that must be important. C-47s. Okay. Approved. So next time you need railroad spikes, you just got to call them something fancy that no one knows. Right. And then where you go.
On it.
Pro tip right there.
But for me, it was just an example of that red tape of it was the stifling an idea without thinking about that idea, and because of the bigness, because they can't allow railway spikes to be put in schoolyards. I get that, but
S13s.
Yeah, so I would agree. Yeah, right. S13s do an excellent job holding together cedar posts.
There you go.
But so from my experience in a smaller organization, it's been pretty nimble, and I see it as being pretty successful, though I can imagine how that might go. That's a slippery slope, so I don't know.
Well, what's your approach, Tom, to implementing change?
Oh God, I argue a lot. I have a tough time taking things at face value. I always try and look at it from a teacher perspective and not an administrator perspective. Not that there's anything wrong with with administrators. Obviously, I wouldn't say that. But
thanks.
Their perspective is different. I found the further up the ladder goes for administrators, the further away from kids they get. And I just try and bring it back down to what's best for the students. And as administrators don't always do what's best for the students. They do what's best for the school because that's their perspective. Valid perspective, because that's what their job is. They're out to look after the school. But somebody has to advocate for the kids, and that's not always done. So what do I do? I do argue a lot. I question a lot. I didn't ask for permission a whole bunch. I just went ahead and would do things until somebody would say that you can't do things. But that was me, and I was willing to take that chance and put things on the line to do that. But you can't ask everybody to do that. Too often, we've got great teachers who go into a system and they kind of have to get along to go along to get along, so to speak. And before you know it, they're no longer good teachers.
I did this presentation about innovators and innovation and how you go about becoming someone that's innovative in a class and whatever. So I did this presentation last year, winter, and I had someone push back and write a blog about it, and was saying that I was creating this rosy glow that innovators are seen as valuable, and everybody should be an innovator, and you should get involved too. But the reality is, it creates a bit of a black sheep thing, and you have to do things without asking and beg forgiveness after, and people get upset with you. And it was a really valid point that I thought about, because I think we do sometimes throw the capital R romantic on top of things like that, but you can't, in a system, you can't ask all teachers to do that. Like, I certainly enjoy the idea of, doing it and begging forgiveness later, but it's tough to sort of set that as the norm.
Yeah,
right?
The rhetoric is always, we want innovation and we want innovators, but the policy is always, to hold that back and to keep that down. You know, you can't expect to have, you know, out of the box thinkers if you've got in the box policies. It just doesn't work that way.
I like that. I like that.
Write that tagline down quick.
Yeah. Put it on a coffee mug, sell it. But it makes me think of a guy who taught at our school years ago, and I see him occasionally. And Tom, in some ways, he kind of reminds me of you in that he was always kind of questioning the status quo. He was always trying something new, and he was very much from the beg for forgiveness camp. And he was an incredible teacher. In my first year, I remember I actually went in and just sat in his classroom. And he's one of these teachers where you don't go to the class so much as you do sit at the feet of. You know, he was just one of these guys who could he ran his classroom really differently. But I mean, he's also the kind of guy who could just sit there and talk. And you could just listen to him talk all day. You know, they tell you not to, but this guy, he had that license to do it, right? But he got sick of the environment, you know, of trying to change things, of trying to do things differently, and always never getting full blowback, but always just getting a little like, you sure? You know, raised eyebrows and tisk tisk and all that kind of stuff. So he left. He got tired of it. Maybe actually, so, Tom, you're not an administrator, yeah?
No, I'm nothing anymore.
I'm nothing.
Nothing.
I was a secondary English teacher for 34 years, and then I did higher ed for 6 years. So after 40 years, I'm out of teaching.
Yeah, you're all up.
I just go around and talk and write, and that's about it.
Appear on podcasts.
Yeah.
But Derek, how about you then? Like, what do you? I mean, because surely there must be some level of instinct required. I mean, I don't think everyone out there can just, you know, innovate and try something new and beg for forgiveness, because at some point, you know, some kid's going to have a third-degree burn because they thought it was going to be a good idea to, like, you know, why did I even come up with that idea? Make torches. That I'm not trying to be topical. I actually had students do that once, and it terrified me. But Derek, so I mean, how do you approach that, or do you just inherently trust all your educators?
You got to wear a bunch of different hats, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those is cultivating your innovators. Because I don't think it's fair to, like I said before, I don't think it's fair to expect that everybody's going to be on the edge. And nor do I think it's particularly productive to have everybody on the edge. Mm-hmm. But you need to find a way to make sure that those people feel comfortable out there. Like what you don't want to do is have the person you said. So you get this great teacher who's maybe pushing boundaries and maybe sometimes too much. And then they get tired of getting their hand slapped, so they retire or leave or whatever. Mm-hmm. You don't want that. But you also don't want what you said of things going too far. So I think if you build a relationship, and just, you know, I mean, to me, it's having those conversations. It's sitting the person down, or not sitting them down, but like sitting down with them and saying, okay, great, you're my innovator. Like, you're one of the stable of innovators, and that's awesome. And I want you to do that. Here's the line. Like, here's where I don't want you to go past, please. But otherwise, work within it and then give them the freedom to do that, and trust teachers. I mean, for some reason, I don't know what it is, but I mean, the teachers are professionals. They have a professional designation. Mm-hmm. Right. And there's this feeling from a lot of administrators that you have to manage and control teachers, but you don't. Like, they have a role and they have a professional standard that they've met. Mm-hmm. And I would expect that they're going to stay within that until they don't, and then we'll deal with that. But like, I'm not going to expect that somebody isn't going to do that.
Trust is the
I talked my way in a circle there, but does that make sense? Yeah, like, totally. You want to start with giving everybody as much freedom as possible, and that'll work out better. The more people have autonomy and a feeling that, like, what they do matters and what they do is trusted, the more they're going to do things that work.
Yeah, this comes down to the school culture, and it's such an important part of any school, yet it's been overlooked for years. It's only recently that we're even talking about what school culture is and what an effect it has on a building. It's that kind of thinking where an administrator is open to innovation and creates an atmosphere for innovation to be cultivated that's going to be successful. Not every school does that. Unfortunately, there are people who just don't want to go out of the lines. They want to stay in the lines, and if that becomes a rule follower, somebody who has to, just check off stuff on the boxes, there's not going to be a whole lot of innovation going on in that particular school. So school culture has become, since we recognize it now as to what it is, we've got to promote better cultures in a school.
One, like teaching in your class, it's modeling, right? Like, I mean, you can see over my shoulder here on Twitter, there's my Lego wall that I love, and I don't think that's
I've been staring at it the entire time.
Oh, my Lego wall's amazing. I love it, and I use it with students
Lego
all the time. We say en français ici, we're bilingual.
Oh, what's mur? Is that wall?
Yeah, Lego wall. Yeah, wall of Lego.
I learned something new today. Right on.
There you go.
And then it's got the word on it.
That's for my new podcast I got going on. But anyway.
All right. Well, maybe bring it full circle, because just to kind of stay true to the series title, which is about Twitter, but I love where this has gone. But the thought that kind of came back to me is, if we're looking for ways to increase the depth of Twitter and talking about innovation and begging forgiveness and all this kind of stuff, I mean, Twitter can be a good sounding wall too, right? I mean, you get the ideas from it, you go away, you develop it, you broaden it out, you make something, a little more with a little more flesh on the bones, and then you can take it back and say, okay, hey, everyone, look at this thing. What do you think? Right? That's a good way to avoid burning the building down in the name of innovation, maybe.
Well, Twitter has allowed transparency in education more so than anything else. If you go back 10 years, when I first started on Twitter, most schools were blocking the internet from kids and from teachers. You went to school and you were completely blocked out of the internet, and they would use, in the American schools, they would use the FERPA, COPA, and SIPA laws, saying that because of these laws, we can't allow kids on the internet. Well, that was just a bunch of BS, because it was administrators who didn't understand the law and didn't, because they didn't understand the law, they just ruled everything out. Once we got on Twitter and people started explaining that these laws do not mean that you have to prohibit people from access to the internet, things started to open up, so that now more and more schools have opened up the internet to their students and to their teachers. But it was that transparency that allowed that to happen. I think that's one of the huge benefits of Twitter, seeing who's doing what where, and then realizing that you can do the same thing in your school. Or if your school is really good, you can share that with people. It goes both ways. So that whole transparency factor for Twitter, I think, is probably one of the best reasons for educators to be on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. And it gives you a chance to, have some pre-vetted ideas. I mean, if you're seeking to innovate, I mean, there's sometimes, some innovations are dead ends. Right, some of the stuff is just not going to work, or maybe needs another 6 rounds of iteration before it's going to look like anything good. So if you can go to someone who's got a similar idea, who's already iterated 4 or 5 times, you can pick up from where they left off, and then save yourself a ton of time.
Yep.
All right. Any other thoughts, Derek? Here, I think we're kind of looking at.
Yeah, no, I have one that I want to poke at a little bit, if you don't mind. Hey, Tom. So this morning, or maybe it was yesterday, you put a tweet out about failure, right?
Yep.
Okay, and so
responded to, as a matter of fact.
Yes, I certainly did. Because what I think is really interesting is you're mentioning failure. We need to fail to get better, and then somebody who's not Shane put a comment about don't you mean iterations?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. And now Shane had talked about iterations now. And so I was arguing with Shane the other day about how I don't agree. We were
sharing ideas.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Sharing our perspective.
I think that there's no reason to soften the word failure. Like, let's just call it what it is. It's a failure. That's great. Why do we feel bad about it? Can't we feel good about it and move on from there? And I'll let him speak his piece, but he was talking about iterations and this idea that let's not give the negative connotations of failure. Let's talk about how this is positive in iterations. So what are your thoughts?
Oh, are you doing this really? You're getting Tom to mediate? Oh,
yep.
Well, I think, again, all of us being victims of 20th century education. I know when I went to school and when I was learning to be a teacher, one of the things that they would drive into everybody's head is you don't want to make a mistake in front of your class because that's a failure. Don't make a mistake in front of your class. And we carry that on as teachers. We believe that, and then we carry it on, and we actually punish kids for failure, which is crazy. All these negative grades that are given out because kids are failing. Failing is part of learning, and we have to understand that. But it's what we do with that failure, how we handle that failure, that's going to judge whether or not we are going to be successful. So I could see using the term iterations, but nevertheless, failure is what it is, and recognize what it is. But it's our attitude toward failure and the connotation that it now has brought on because of the way it's been treated, all this time. But again, as an educator, we have to understand that you will make mistakes as you learn, but you're going to get beyond those mistakes and carry that with you. It's all part of learning. That's what sticks to learning in your head, the mistakes that you make.
Absolutely. I was just explaining that to my 3-year-old daughter today. She ran out with me in a parking lot.
So yeah, I got into the conversation, like I say, with Shane with that, and then with somebody else on Twitter yesterday who was talking about the negative connotations, and because there's negative connotations with failure, let's call it something else. And that bothers me a little bit. Apparently bothers me a lot. Where, like, can't we change the culture around it? Like, wouldn't it be, because then you're just calling it a different name and not changing the feeling around what it is. You can call it if calling a different name will actually change the feeling, fine. But I feel like it's not. I feel like it's just another way of calling it a failure. And then, well, instead of kids being upset when they fail a test, now they feel upset when they need to do another iteration of a test. Right? Instead, can we just change the feeling of mistakes and failure as being negative? And having them be the start of something. That was a philosopher, I forget his name now, who I read recently, who said that failure is the site that begins success.
I thought it was failure is the site of success eliminated, isn't it? That's what.
There you go. That's what it was. Yes, thank you.
But here's the thing: I'm not arguing for a change in nomenclature. I'm not saying let's get rid of failure and replace it with the word iteration. Like, I'm not saying let's get rid of manhole and replace it with personnel access port. Manhole's sexist, right? What I'm saying is, I want to give it. I want to have a more accurate word to describe the process of learning in my classroom. Because there are times kids will give me an answer and I'll just look at them, give them a thumbs down and go like that. I'm like, no, that's terrible. That's wrong. Not to, some sweet little kid that I was going to cry when I do that. But, there's certain kids I know I can do that with. But the point is, the kids know, yeah, there's failure. But to me, like, failure is like end stop. It's like, you failed that test. Can I do it again? No, sorry, we're moving on. Right. So to me, iteration is actually something that's very close alongside failure in the way that we talk about it, but it's different, because to me, it's like, okay, it's iteration. Like, this didn't go the way you wanted it to, so you iterate, you do it again, and you make it better the next time. And it's, you can, if you want, or you can just, if you decide to leave it and you get, and it's like a 20% job, then yeah, okay, now it's a failure. So that's my approach to it. But I mean, I think when it all comes down to is we're splitting hairs, we walk away from this. And honestly, whether you use failure and whether I use iteration, the fact is we're not going to change things for the worse. And I think, as long as we accept that there is some aspect of doing things more than once in order to reach an end goal of, perfection, or as close as we can get to that, then I think we're doing okay.
Sure, I can agree to that.
Done. Either that or we turn this let's turn it into another bonus episode all about failure versus iteration.
There you go.
Episode 4 right there. No, 3? I don't even know where we're at anymore. All right. Let's wrap this thing up, guys. This has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this. So, Tom, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate getting to know you a little bit and hear your thoughts on all this stuff.
You're so welcome.
And Derek, as always, been a pleasure.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Yeah, you guys too.
Okay, guys. Thanks a lot.